Welcome everyone. Today we have Akram.
Hi.
We work together at BCG and now he works at Google. Today we want to answer the question of whether you should join consulting or tech after you graduate. Shall we get started?
Yeah, let's.
Fantastic. Let's get to it. We're going to be talking about some pros and cons about both consulting and tech, and then we're going to make our verdict. Let's get started with consulting then. All right, so when we think about consulting, let's just get started with one of the things that I loved about it, which is high impact opportunity. One of the examples I could give is that when I joined Carney, only at the age of 20, I was doing my internship there, and I found myself in a project which was actually in the news as well. And at the end, the report was shared directly with the Prime Minister too. So that got me thinking, oh, wow, okay, consulting is a place that I want to be in. So this is definitely one of the biggest advantages, I would say, as a job. If you really want to make an impact, you can actually get it done even when you're an intern. What do you think?
Definitely, I agree. And I think consulting gives you access to an exposure level that you would not normally see at that age if you were to do something that's not consulting. The fact that you are able to present to very high-level leaders at any organization, I think is a huge plus when you do consulting.
But this also means that you have to ramp up very fast when you start a consulting project, right?
Yes.
So this means you have to learn things right off the bat. You probably only have a couple of hours to ramp up yourself. We can argue whether this is a good or a bad thing, but especially if you're enjoying learning new things and you love working in a very high-paced environment, consulting would definitely be the right choice for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that you learn so many different things, not just in terms of the wide different industries that you learn, but also in an organization, you can work with strategy, you can work with marketing, you can work with sales, you can work with HR. Just being able to touch all these different aspects of an organization is not an opportunity that you would get if you were to work in a non-consulting firm, at least in the time frame that you do in consulting.
And we should talk about why it is important for you to work in different industries, because of course everyone talks about it, but why is it important for you? I want to boil it down to two things actually. One of them is that as you just graduate from your university, you're just 21, perhaps 22 years old maximum, and most likely you don't know what you're good at, right? You need to explore yourself. And so consulting definitely gives you this opportunity. And at the same time, you may not also know what you enjoy, because you don't know whether you like tech, you like consumer, you want retail, right? So when you join consulting, you do work in many different industries. So I would also suggest this to be one of the biggest advantages of the profession.
Definitely. And it's also one of the reasons why I started consulting right after uni.
And let's also talk about how projects are typically run in consulting as well. Some people, including myself, enjoy a lot of intellectual stimulation as consulting provides you with. The whole process of solving a client's problem really pushes you and actually makes you feel pretty excited, right? On a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get to solve some of the problems that sometimes they didn't have the resource to solve themselves. And being able to solve something for that organization is a huge rush. And typically, if someone is calling a consultant, and specifically if they're calling MBB, means that they're paying a lot of money. So it usually becomes a very complex problem. Being able to solve that problem is a huge opportunity and very fulfilling.
Exactly. And you need that rush when you're 21, 22 years old, right?
Absolutely.
Let's also talk about perhaps some cons of consulting and some arguments. So let's just address the elephant in the room, which is the work-life balance.
Yes.
My observation here is that usually offices in developing economies tend to do a little bit worse than the ones in the developed ones. What I see here is that on average, you have to work about 60 plus hours as a consultant when you're in a project. And I would say there are two drivers behind this. First of all, when we look into those offices, they tend to overcommit to their clients because they want to turn them into a platform client. So this means that usually projects are either understaffed or there's additional scope of work added to the project towards the end of the engagement. So this means that you have to put in very long hours. And I would say on average, based on my experience, it's somewhere around 60. But of course, sometimes weekend work might be required and sometimes it's even more than this. Also in developed economies, sometimes I feel that there aren't many other job opportunities besides consulting, not as attractive perhaps. So I just have this feeling that perhaps they have the bargaining power over the consultants. Whereas when you look into more the developed economies, because you do have other alternatives, they sometimes cannot afford asking consultants to work that long hours, but which is my personal point of view, of course.
Yeah, I agree with the things that you've said. I think, these long working hours, I think if you are looking to work in consulting, you need to go in with your eyes wide open. And the truth of the matter is that you do work as many hours necessary as it is to get to a point where the client is satisfied. And that's the kind of the nature of the service industry, and that's what consulting is. Now, I do agree the dynamics of how much you work depend on how the project is staffed, what the relationship with the client is. There's a lot of different things that can, come into play here. There's also a very possibility that there's an emergency, that you need to solve something very quick, that there's a last minute meeting that prepare materials for. And these are things that maybe happen rarely, maybe happen often, but they do happen. And in these cases, you will need to put in the extra effort of maybe working, sometimes through the night, sometimes late in the night.
Exactly. And one of the, I guess, other drawbacks of working for a client is that you have to portray a lot of experience too, because you do tend to work with your client counterparts that have maybe over 20 years of experience, and they're actually expecting as BCG, as McKinsey, to also portray a similar level of, if not more, of confidence and expertise in the field. Yes, one might argue that it is good that you're always doing different things, but at the same time, sometimes you might have this feeling of insecurity because almost every single project requires different set of topic expertise, and every single time you can't really always leverage what you learned in your previous project, and you still have to portray this confidence and expertise in front of the client. So that feeling, that continuous feeling of insecurity, perhaps is not for everyone.
I agree. And you do have to deal with this sense of insecurity, and I think it's something that everybody battles with. And there's a few dynamics there that kind of impact it. I think the number one thing you said was that you are in front of C-levels. Sometimes you're in front of very high-level executives in an organization, and they've been there for a long time, and they really know what they're talking about. And so when you come across them, you also need to know what you're talking about, but you have a much less time to understand and to learn all of that knowledge. In addition to that, there's another aspect I think that might add to your sense of insecurity, is that you are always getting feedback on the work that you're doing. And I like to think that a consultant's job is actually never done, because the only time that you actually stop and say, this is the product that we're delivering, is based on the time and the resource that you have. It's never that you do something that's 100% complete. It's more dictated by the best that you were able to do within the given time frame, because there's always things you can add. There's always analyses that you can add. And so you can, if you had infinite time, maybe you could deliver a complete product. However, what this means is that whatever you do, there will be somebody who tells you, okay, we did this, and here's what we could have done, or here's what the gap was to a perfect solution. Now, that's something that I think will also impact, especially somebody who's recently out of uni, who maybe does not have the work experience to, manage that insecurity well. That might maybe be a con of consulting, for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't know, just based on what we discussed, and also we might be a bit biased because we come from BCG, but I definitely see a lot of advantages over disadvantages. Why don't we then now talk about tech? Because I'm sure many people also are thinking of joining tech, perhaps as opposed to consulting. So what might be some different things one should expect from tech as opposed to consulting?
Yeah, of course. I think the most obvious thing would be that it's very exciting. You work on technology that maybe that is the latest technology that people are developing as we speak, and this technology is rolled out to potentially millions of users depending on where and who you work for, and that's very exciting. And if you're somebody who is into tech, and I am, and follow news or follow different technologies, then it's something that I think is very fulfilling. And even though consulting, we see that we have a lot of different industries, we have a lot of different, let's say, functions that you can go to, and you're constantly learning, it's not always that you're learning something that's at the, let's say, avant-garde of what is available in society. Whereas when you work in tech, if it is one of those companies, then you could really be working on something that's truly exciting and that's truly new.
And also at Google, I'm sure many people are working with MBB on different engagements. So when you compare your roles and responsibilities versus what those consulting firms deliver, what might be some differences? The reason I'm asking this is because I'm just trying to unravel what might be some differences between joining tech versus working in tech projects in consulting.
So joining the company as opposed to doing a consulting project for that company is fundamentally different. So when you're doing a project, you don't really have months and months or years and years. You do the project and then you typically leave, depending on whether that client continues to have a project with you or you have a project later on down the line. Sure. But what happens is you have a beginning, middle, and an end of your involvement with them, typically. Now, when you work for that company, that's not the case. You are in a role, you're continuously responsible for that role, and the things that you do have long-term impacts that you need to be responsible for, which is not always the case in consulting, because you can deliver a project in consulting and the implementation of that project could be left up to the organization. And that's not something that would be the responsibility of the consulting team.
Now, I also want to talk about some disadvantages or some arguments towards why tech may not be the best fit for you. What would you say for that?
Yeah, of course. With anything, there's pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. One of the disadvantages I think about tech would be that there's a lot of ambiguity. So because technology is always evolving, it's fast paced, but with that comes a lot of ambiguity. So you need to be comfortable with the fact that you are not going to know everything, which I think sometimes consultants might have some challenge, but you will need to start working on things and get the information that you need along the way. Obviously, dealing with this ambiguity takes a lot of strain. And if you're somebody that doesn't enjoy that, then tech might not be the answer for you. Another thing would be that I say tech all encompassingly, but tech doesn't necessarily mean only the latest research or the most avant-garde tech. There are also tech that's constantly being used. That may not be the case. So you might be in an organization where you're working on a product that might not be the core value of that organization. And so it might not be as exciting as you thought it would be. I think it's important to manage your expectations when you go into that organization if you choose to do so.
Okay, so we made our arguments for certain pros and cons of both, but is there a short answer to whether one should join consulting or tech?
I think it depends. Being in consulting definitely has its advantages. The skills that you learn are very transferable to tech in other industries. And so, going through that consulting, let's say crucible, has a lot of advantages. Also, if you're in an MBB, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, then that also has its advantages in terms of your personal brand, in terms of your resume, for sure, if you go into something other than consulting later on. Now, if you do want to start in tech and you know that your entire career is going to be in tech, I think it makes sense that you get that experience as early as possible. But again, it depends on you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, thinking strategically, thinking analytically, or being able to communicate well, which are some of the staples of consulting, are only learned through consulting. There are options in tech where you can learn these as well.
Okay. Thanks out for all the insights today, Akram. Highly appreciate it. And I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people in deciding, or at least giving them the initial start of their research. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, of course. Happy to.
All right. I hope you found today's conversation helpful. If you did, please give us a like before you leave, and we'll see you in the next video.